Thank you all so much. What a phenomenal audience. And the first thing I'd like to do is to thank you all for your indulgence in allowing me to speak English. I am always so incredibly impressed by how bilingual and often trilingual the Dutch are. So please accept my huge compliments and gratitude. I will also try to remember to speak a little slower than I usually do. Even in England, I am told I speak fast. So I'm going to really try and pace it. This is a very different subject, in one way, to what you've just been listening to. And, of course, I didn't understand a lot of it. But I would say that there have been two things. Actually, there have been, I would say, two main, for our campaign, silver linings, as we call them in English, out of this terrible global situation that we've had with the COVID pandemic. One of those is that we have all realized we actually don't need to travel as much as we thought. This campaign, which was co-founded in 2017 by myself and British lawyer Polly Higgins, is a campaign focused on creating a new international crime of ecocide. In other words, to make mass damage and destruction of the earth a criminal offense at the international level. A couple of years ago, thank you. A couple of years ago, very few people had heard of this initiative and of what we are doing. But over the last year and a half, because we couldn't travel, and because all the big international events went online, we were able to be present at a huge number of international conferences and forums and situations which we would never normally have been able to access. So it's been a great equalizer and a great democratizer. Here, I'm standing above you on a stage so that you can all see me. On a screen, it's not necessary. There are no podiums. There are no security guards. There are no, you must know the right person to get invited to that event. Yeah, okay, that's still there a little bit. But you can see everybody together on a screen and everybody is equal. And that has been a really major advantage for taking this work forward. And the second thing that has been really important about what we've seen happening over the last year is that we now know that if a government needs to move fast, it can. That if businesses need to move fast, they can. We've seen it happen. So something that used to be said to us over many years is, wow, yes, this idea of criminalizing serious harm to nature. I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like a great idea. You know, like sometime a long way in the future. But it will take ages. It will take far too long. We all know how slow the machines of government move. Well, actually, now we know that's not true. Now we know there is the possibility to make change fast when we need to make it. And isn't it interesting that when it comes to human health, we can discuss all around the world this terrible emergency that we are in. And yet when it comes to talking about the climate, when it comes to talking about the breakdown of the precious and vital ecosystems on which we all profoundly depend, somehow that is not treated as an emergency. Of course, it's no surprise in that context that the young people are wanting to take time off school to raise the awareness around the climate emergency. Treat it as an emergency, they're asking us. And sometimes I hear politicians say, yeah, you know, this new energy that's coming in from the youth, this is wonderful, you know, they're going to somehow, you know, that new energy is going to sort out everything, and we need to look to the youth for inspiration. That's nonsense. The youth are talking to us to our generation, and okay, that probably ranges across a bit of a broad spectrum here, including myself. I mean, I'm no spring chicken. And they are saying, what are you doing? Where are your solutions? Where is the action that you are taking? We should not be sitting there and waiting for them to do things. They're calling us into responsibility. When I first heard about, this is how I got into all of this. When I first heard about fracking, I'd already been what we call in the UK a kind of armchair activist for a number of years. You know, writing petitions, signing petitions, writing to parliamentarians, and so on. And then I read about fracking, and I thought, this is an insane way to try and create energy. Incredible, decades of incredible intelligence, finance, research, all of this, into this technique that is so clearly polluting. And I was speaking about it with my family, and my little daughter, who was 5 then, she's 13 now, she was 5 then, and she just burst into tears. And she has this way of crying that's incredible. She still does it. If she bursts into tears, they literally jump out of her eyes like this. And she's like, Mummy, I don't understand. She said, if they're poisoning the ground, surely they understand they are poisoning themselves. You have to call them and tell them to stop. And I said, darling, I don't know what kind of difference it's going to make if I just pick up the phone to one of these big companies. And she said, but there must be someone you can talk to. This is 5, she's 5, yeah? And the previous week, we had been to the ballot box. We'd been to the local elections. She'd been running around the little booth where I had to sit there and do my little cross, And she said, Mummy, can't you talk to the voting man? And I thought, wow, I'm seriously being called into responsibility. I'm like, okay, I've sat here signing these petitions, but she's saying I need to actually get up and go talk to someone. So anyway, I took her along, and my little boy as well, who at that time was like 1 or 2. We went to the local parliamentarians' surgery, as they call it. Yeah, a bit like a doctor, I think that's a misnomer. But I asked him all these questions about fracking. And he did this wonderful thing that politicians are also good at. He kind of slipped. He kind of went, every question I asked, he kind of dodged. And I came out of that meeting thinking, that is never happening again. And I went and I researched, and I found out all the information that I needed to be able to talk to people publicly, to be able to run surveys, to be able to give talks, to be able to create materials, to be able, in 2015, to put every single UK parliamentarian on legal notice about the dangers of fracking. Because it was not acceptable that this issue that was going to be so polluting was not going to be addressed by our politicians. And it was in that context that I met Polly Higgins, who was working on this concept of ecocide. And I remember reading about it a few years prior to meeting her, not knowing that I was going to meet her. And I remember reading this article and thinking, hey, that's a really good idea. This is the biggest game in town. You just go to the people who are causing all of the damage and you say, you know what, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Why hasn't that already happened? And so, it was kind of a no-brainer. And to this day, I have yet to meet a single person, one-to-one, who thinks this is a bad idea. Not one. So why has this not happened? Well, it was considered kind of extreme at the time. And this campaign was born out of this awareness that while there was a strong following for this idea, that those in positions of power, those in positions who were able to fund this kind of work, thought it was too difficult and too way out there. And yet, what Polly had discovered was a very particular and very achievable route to getting where we wanted to go. In other words, to criminalizing serious harm to nature. And this particular route is the route that our now global campaign follows. And it's very specific, and it's to make ecocide an international crime. So a crime at the level of the International Criminal Court, which, as you know, is based in The Hague, and which has a governing document called the Rome Statute, which currently has 4 crimes in it, with which you'll be familiar. at least in terms of talking about them: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and more recently, the crime of aggression. Now, that document is intended to address the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole. Is there anyone in this room who thinks that mass destruction of nature is not of serious concern to humanity as a whole? Okay, I'm putting you on the spot thing here. Let's do it the other way around. Who believes that serious harm to our natural world is a matter of serious international concern? Thank you. Thank you. And so it does belong there. It does belong there. Sometimes people ask us, how can you put ecocide alongside genocide? Isn't that going too far? Isn't that going a step too far? Well, you have to separate. You have to separate two things: the intention and the consequence. Because, of course, with the intention, there probably is no intention that is more evil than genocide. The crime of genocide actually requires you to intend to destroy a people in whole or in part, and that's horrific. With ecocide, it's not like that. With ecocide, it's not usually intentional. What normally happens is, you want to make money, you want to produce beef, you want to catch fish, you want to create energy, whatever those things are, and the collateral damage is the ecocide. But when you look at the consequences, that's when you see that ecocide truly does belong at the level of an international crime. Why do we go for this particular route? I mean, there are a number of reasons, but one very practical, sort of legal, almost mechanical reason is that the mechanism of the ICC, of the International Criminal Court, is the only global mechanism which directly accesses the criminal justice systems of all its member states. So, if you ratify ecocide as a crime at the International Criminal Court as a member state, you must include it in your own domestic legislation. And that is very important. We don't have a huge amount of time. Everybody's telling us this is the decisive decade in terms of actually making a difference to the climate and ecological emergency. If we want to create a ground rule which applies across borders, this is the most effective and efficient way to do it. It's also the case that the vast majority of really serious international effects in terms of damage to the environment are often caused by large transnational corporations. It's corporate activity. And those corporations have the possibility to be able to hop from one jurisdiction to another, depending on where the regulations are more lax. So obviously there are quite obvious advantages to approaching this at the international level. It is a global problem. We can't kind of point over there and say, that leak, the leak that the water's flowing out of, well, that's at your end of the boat. Doesn't work. That's how boats sink. So it has to be international. The second thing, reason for that is also, funnily enough, is also time. Because although we need to act quickly, with something like this, there needs to be a transition period. There has to be. Because the whole way that our mindset has evolved over many, many years is effectively a very strongly separating mindset between humans and nature. We treat nature as a resource. We treat it as something that we're allowed to dominate and simply use to extract for our own purposes, without really taking account of the profound reality, which is that we are completely intertwined with nature. And in order to make that shift, in order for every corporate sector, and there's so much expertise available in all of those sectors, this is all completely possible, but there is some time needed to do that, because we need to see this as a parameter, a really useful limit. And as a former entrepreneur myself, I know very well that the clearer the limits you have, the more creative you can get. It's very important. And so it's very important to gather the momentum, to gather the support of many states, and in a minute I'll give you a brief update on where we are with the campaign so that you know how active and how much momentum this really is gaining. And that takes some time. But the important thing about that is everyone can see it coming. And everyone needs to see it coming. They need to see it coming because they need to be able to get their heads around how to do it. The politicians need to get their heads around the transition policies. The corporate experts need to get their heads around how exactly their particular industry is going to sink or swim a different way within that context. And the third reason, which is actually the most profound and ultimately, we believe, the most long-term important, is that criminal law is what we use in our dominant Western paradigm, which is basically what's running the world right now. We use criminal law to draw moral lines. That's what we use to draw moral lines. We all know you can't go to a government and say, I would like a permit to kill a few hundred people for my new infrastructure project. Just doesn't work. Okay, it's criminal, it's bad, it's wrong. It's also a profound taboo. So profound that it doesn't even cross our minds, or it certainly shouldn't. But we don't have that same healthy recoil from destroying ecosystems, destroying species, destroying landscapes, damaging the atmosphere. We don't have that same recoil, and we should do. We need it. We actually desperately need it. We are in a stage of not just a threat to a people in whole or in part, but to the whole of human civilization as we know it. So that taboo will be new. For most people, not for everybody. But, I could talk at length about, learning from the indigenous cultures who actually are guardians of 80% of the world's biodiversity and their very different attitude and how that really isn't a coincidence. But in the dominating paradigm, we do need to learn this. We need to learn this taboo. And putting a serious crime at the highest level, at the international level, has that potential to create that taboo, to begin to do that, to begin to bridge that, to begin to rebalance that imbalance, if you like. We all know that creating a law doesn't stop the thing from happening. Murder has been a crime since time immemorial. That doesn't mean murder doesn't happen. But it means that we know it's wrong and that we recoil from it, and that is hugely important. I know. I'm going to go into. I know. She's doing what I asked her to do, actually. She said, "How long do you want to talk?" I said, "I want to take questions from the audience." So there is up here. She's going to stop.
But I know you need to catch a ferry.
I know. I do need to catch a ferry. Okay, let's take a couple of questions, and I know I've got one or two more points I want to make before we finish. So
yeah, let's do that. Let's do some questions, because Jojo said there's usually millions of questions. Thank you so much. I really love the way how you use your whole body when you talk. It's so passionate. Seriously. Okay, questions. Where are they? Here.
Hello, thank you for your amazing story. I'm Peter Ackerman. I'm writing the Dutch National Environmental Policy. My question is, you focus on international law, but I think national law might be more impactful at the moment because it's more binding to everyone. Why did you choose to do international law over national law?
This is a very good question, and it links in with the second reason I gave about time. The good example to look at would be France, where they actually have legislated for what they've called ecocide. And the interesting thing about that is that precisely because most national law is implemented kind of immediately, what it's meant is that they've had to water down the definition in order to make it acceptable to certain sectors of French society. So effectively, it's probably less powerful than is actually needed longer term. So what we would say, and we would never discourage national law, and of course what we also know is that if things are ratified at the International Criminal Court, they also do come down to national law as well. So it kind of hits the... You know what? People use these metaphors in English, and probably in Dutch too. A lot of them are very violent. There's this one, killing two birds with one stone. But I like to say, watering two plants with one can. We're going to the International Criminal Court. But what we would recommend for national governments, and we are in conversation with a number of them, is that we would recommend a transition period. We would recommend an enforcement date that is a certain point in the future. Not far. It needs to be, it can't be too far. But say 3 years. Something that actually has the country see it coming. I think that's really important. And the other thing we would recommend, and I would really encourage you to come up here. I did put them at the outside, but they blew away. So I brought them in here. We've got leaflets, and we've also got these little cards, which actually have and these which actually have the definition, the legal definition of ecocide on them. There's loads of them, so come and take one. And it's actually rather brilliant. This has been a fantastic milestone in our campaign because in fact, our Dutch charitable arm, which is our fundraising arm, did a wonderful thing earlier this year, actually it was the end of last year, commissioned an international panel of top environmental lawyers and international criminal lawyers and climate lawyers from all around the world to spend several months, which they did early this year, coming up with a definition, a legal definition that could actually be considered by governments to move forward at the International Criminal Court. And that's a massive milestone and got us a lot of attention around this because it makes it real. It makes it real for those governments and for political actors. So just to read it, ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with the knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. And I want to say one more thing about that before I take another question. Sorry, I'm being very... I apologise.
No, don't.
The important thing about this definition is that it's really balanced between protecting from the worst harms and acknowledging that there are laws already in place. In other words, a lot of environmental law is simply not enforced well enough, and this will really reinforce the existing environmental laws, because environmental law is a relatively new body of law, and it's not currently taken as seriously as the law that protects people or the law that protects property in particular. And it's very important that this is taken seriously, because right now, and this spring tie is a brilliant example of this, there are plenty of corporations who are still doing things that they shouldn't be doing in the context of the reports that are coming out internationally now. When we look at the report that came out in August, the IPCC report, when we look at the International Energy Agency report from earlier this year, it is very, very clear the direction that we need to be going in. Now, I understand this festival to be a bridging kind of a situation, where there are lots of corporations, this is an incredible room full of people who are influential in so many different spheres, which is incredible, and they're here to get inspired to move in the right direction. But you know what? We're crawling. We are crawling in the right direction. And this is, it's great that these festivals are happening, but and we need to be sprinting. We need to be sprinting. And what that means is that all of those corporations who are backing this incredible festival need to be thinking very carefully about agreeing with this law. About actually saying, you know what, we can see this is needed. There are companies, there's a company in Denmark.
Yeah, man. Come on.
There's a company in Denmark, I believe, that has changed from being the biggest fossil fuel energy company to being the biggest renewable energy company. These transitions are possible, and they need to be thought about very quickly and very thoroughly. And you know what? I'm gonna throw out one more thing, okay?
Go.
I promise, one more, and then we'll have another question.
No.
I talked to the beginning about, and just so you know, I did sign that letter that was publicized yesterday saying, sponsors should be thinking about this stuff, and Spring Tie should be thinking about this. We need to be sprinting, not crawling, okay?
Jojo, I have to stop. You have to catch a ferry.
No, I have one more point, and then I'm going to stop.
Okay.
Do you want one more point? One more point. Yeah, you see, they want one more point. Okay, here's my idea. I'm going to throw it out there. The youth movement, they call themselves Fridays for Future, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we were to actually take that seriously, what would that look like? To me, that would look like every single environmental, but every single educational institution, every single legal chambers, every single government department, every single workplace in every single industry, taking Friday off. Not off, but stopping their normal work, spending the afternoon on a Friday actually thinking about the future, using it as a Friday afternoon think tank. I mean, God, you know, we've got the entire future of our species at stake. A few hours a week of everybody's time.
Thank you, Jojo, for your passion. Seriously. Thank you so much. She came all the way from England, traveled by train to be here for half an hour on springtij, and now she has to catch the ferry again. So thank you so much. We have to continue. Seriously.
Yeah, okay. So I want to... Katie, you, come here. Come here, stand here. Okay, I know there are lots of questions, and unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to take maybe more than one of them. But it's my fault, and I'm sorry. But I want to introduce this beautiful woman, Katie Olivia van ter Houw, because she is our Dutch director. So if you have more questions or you want to support what we're doing in any way,
Katie
this is the woman to talk to.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Seriously. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, and have a good trip.
Thank you.
Traveling one day again,
Yeah.
all the way back to England.
How are we doing for time?
Yeah, well, you took it was good. I'm happy you did it because it's very important. Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.